Hello, this is Daryl and Matt. We're here to talk about leveraging variable spend in your Agile transformation. I am the CTO of Leading Agile and have worked with Daryl this is the third consulting company over the last 30 years that we've worked together. Daryl, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Matt. Daryl Kulak here. I'm the Principal Studio Director at Leading Agile, and kind of came up through the technical paths as a mainframe developer and then architect and requirements analyst, and then doing Agile for, I guess, the last 20 some years.
All right, so as I said, we're talking about leveraging your variable spend in your Agile transformation. Let's start by kind of talking about different types of spend, right? So there's spend that companies do on that is considered expenses that they may be doing things to improve the organization or to just run the organization. And there's other types of spend that are capitalized, that are being built on projects or building an asset for the company that can then be depreciated over time. It's important to look at both of those types of spend, because many times you're spending much more on capitalized expense than on non-capitalized when you're building products, and you want to figure out, how do I use both of those budgets when I'm working to improve the organization. Daryl, talk about a little bit of the difference between variable spend and non-variable spend.
Oh, sure. So as an IT organization, you'll have your own employees, and then you might have contractors that you're working with. Almost every organization that we deal with has some extent of contractors who are, there for the long term, helping out. And so the organization will have a certain staff that they think is kind of like the minimum that they need. And then as demand rolls up, if you're trying to be cautious, then you might add teams of contractors rather than increasing your employee count, your employee head count or heart count, like we used to call it, Matt.
Yeah.
And the contractors can give you that extra capacity for a while, and then when you cut back, you're not doing layoffs, you're not on the front page news. You just pull back on the contractor spend when things budgets are tighter, and then you can expand it again later.
And we've seen extreme variations of this, right? Some companies we go to, it's about 80% outsourced, where the contractors vastly outnumber the employees. And we've been to organizations which we were the first consultants they had hired in years, right? So it can be pretty much across the board different. What's the most extreme variables you've seen in that, Daryl?
Yeah, it seems to depend on the way that the organization views technology. So if the organization views technology as this big competitive advantage, so for instance, in Silicon Valley, companies we've worked with there, the number of internal employees is pretty high compared to the contractors, because they see software as the whole business, which is right for them. For other companies that see technology kind of as an expense, they may use 70%, 80% contractors and just have a few staff and maybe a lot of things outsourced to other countries for lower rates. And so, yeah, I've seen probably 80-20 in both directions, 20% where 20% employees, and then I've seen 80% employees. So yeah, it's kind of all over the place, and I think it's part of the philosophy of the company. Whether we want to kind of keep IT internal to know all of the aspects of what we're building, versus doesn't matter that much, we can have contractors do it and it'll all be fine.
Yeah. And many times when we're doing a transformation, this is actually an aspect that's being changed, and we encourage for it to be changed intentionally. A lot of companies we deal with are what we call in the upper right quadrant, where their markets are getting disrupted and they need increased agility. So they're in this situation where there's a high rate of change, and IT often has suddenly become strategic. Maybe they built a hardware product like an automobile, which is now becoming largely a software product, which is a lot of software. So they may be moving from IT being an expense in their general mindset to IT being a strategic differentiator.
Yeah,
So when
absolutely.
you're doing that, you may be changing your variable spend. And I think it's important that there's multiple types of variable spend. So sometimes people will have a variable spend, but they're doing it just for a cost play. So they're just outsourcing that expense and they want to have a low cost. There's other types of variable spend where it may be more of a partnership model, that you expect that partner to be there over the long haul, but they have certain skills or expertise, or there's a reason that they're strategic for you within your organization. We'll talk about both of those types of variable spend here as we get into, well, how can I leverage this variable spend in order to transform the organization or make it easier to transform the organization?
Yep.
So, Daryl, why don't you kind of kick that part of the topic off? Why would variable spend have anything to do with how fast or slow I can transform my organization?
Well, so I don't know how many transformations I've been involved in, maybe 13, 14, 15, something like that. And a question I've had to ask the customer every time has been, do you want to transform your vendors? So if you've got a vendor, let's say the vendor is 50% of your IT staff, and you say, okay, we want to do Agile Transformation, are you just going to transform the 50% of your own people, or are you also going to pay for the transformation of your vendor? And, it's kind of I always got a kind of a funny look from people that was, of course, I don't want to transform my vendor, but if they're 50% of your capacity, then how are you going to address that? So that's kind of the first question that we always go to. And, it's not always something that IT directors think of before they kind of make the jump and say, we want to do Agile.
Right. And back to that different types of variable spend, if they're a partner, you may want them to transform along with you because they're going to be there over the long haul. And, you may have to get with their leadership and say, here's where we're going, make sure that they're on board and understand that so that they're working and transforming their side of the organization or their side of the partnership while you're transforming your side of the partnership.
Right.
If they're not a strategic partner and they're just variable staff, what are some of the strategies you can use to leverage that spend?
Yeah. So there's one answer that I never get coming back from that question. Do you want to pay to transform your vendors? And that answer is yes. So no one, in my experience, no one's ever wanted to pay for their vendors to transform in order to have their own transformation happen. So a few different strategies. One is that you ask that vendor to, especially in this partnership situation you're talking about, Matt, you ask that vendor, will you pony up and will you do a transformation as well? And some vendors are capable of doing that, or some vendors may have some teams that have more agility than other teams, so they can shift things around. That's possible. Another is that you can kind of change your vendor picture. So go to each vendor, find out if they have that agility kind of service offering. And if they don't, then kind of weed them out over time and bring in other vendors who have that capability, who are able to keep up with those sprints and those things. And you have to, the questions you have to ask that vendor are actually pretty detailed, because every vendor will say, well, yeah, of course we do Agile, it's the big thing. We go to all the conferences, blah, blah, blah. And then you ask, things like, how long are your sprints? And they'll say, well, they're about 6 months each. There's a difference between how companies define agility, and a lot of it just goes as far as the marketing, and then there's nothing underneath that. And that's true for a lot of big consulting firms we've seen, and true for other firms that are kind of like connected into certain package ecosystems, or that are very specialized and that kind of haven't made that switch yet themselves.
Yeah. And one thing I would advise is, don't just worry about this at the team level. So if you're a team and you're hiring some contractors, trying to manage it there, or trying to take an existing set of contractors and start having this conversation, of course, do that if that's the situation you're in. But it's a much bigger strategic issue. If you're doing a organizational transformation, the C-suite needs involved in this. So your staffing strategy has to acknowledge that, are we trying to move more in-house? Are we trying to, continue our variable spend, and, get procurement involved to say, look, we need these things to be a criteria of every bid that's going out. So if someone is bidding, they have to sign up to produce these types of deliverables, to build software in this way, and it needs to become a thing that's dealt with from the bid. And then you need to get legal involved and make sure that legal is putting into the contracts these things as deliverables, these things as expectations, because that's the only way you're going to arm your people with being able to say, look, we as an organization are changing the way we build software, and we will be accountable for that for our people. We have contracted with you to build software in that way as well, and that's an expectation of how you build software for us. So it's something that's really important to do across the organization, and not just try to bolt on after the fact.
Right. Yeah, the contract's the place to start, and that's an answer to the question, do you want to transform your vendors, that we have dealt with, is companies rewriting their vendor contracts to make sure that those vendors have the same level of agility that you do. But you don't want to write the contract in terms of, we want to make sure that you have a 15-minute meeting every morning, and we want to make sure that you have a product owner, and that your sprints are such and such a length. Those things are internal. Let the vendor deal with that. But what comes back to you, the customer of that vendor, is I want the code written in this particular way. I want automated tests in these places. I want mocks. I want test doubles. And when you get the code back from the vendor, so let's say you specified the requirements, you gave it to a team, let's say it's in India. The Indian team gives you back that code, and you're able to run a set of automated tests, not manual tests, automated tests, and those tests have to run green before you accept the code. So instead of just getting the code and then figuring out what all the problems are, running through manual tests, that's not a good way to work with a vendor. Instead, you want to make it a term of the contract. You will get paid if and when these tests run green. If they don't run green, we give it back to you, and then you give it back to us again. Vendors learn pretty quickly.
Yep. So kind of going back to the topic, right? So leveraging your variable spend to accelerate your agile transformation, right? The corollary to that is, if we don't properly leverage our variable spend, it becomes an anchor to our transformation. We may be spending all kinds of time investing in how we want software to be built, how we want requirements to flow to the teams, and so forth. And then we have teams who don't have that same expectation because we haven't built that in. But once we build that in, now we've got these partner organizations helping lead that, because they're going to get better and better at writing software the way we want it written, as well as now our internal people get to use that, leverage that, and kind of carry things forward. So, in the end, like, if we do this correctly, it's going to be an accelerant, and if we don't, it'll be an anchor. And there are times where, it becomes very collaborative between the partners and the organization, and both of them get to the point where they're able to really help drive and accelerate things. And it's not just this transformation expense that is being used to help. It's all of this capitalized dollars that are building product, building software. It's all being used in a way that makes it more and more likely that you succeed with your transformation.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you said, Matt, of are you doing this at the team level, or are you doing it strategically? So if you do it at the team level, the same way that when you're doing a transformation internally, you have to think about people's career paths, and you think about, okay, so this person was a business analyst, and now I'm asking them to do quality assurance, and I'm asking them to look at code and write test scripts or something. Those things are not in the person's job profile. They're not in their job description. And now you're asking me to do all these things. And when I get to my performance evaluation, I might get knocked for doing these things. So you have to fix those things internally, career pathing, and what your transformation strategy is. Well, think about now that with the vendors. So you're asking these vendors' employees who are on your teams to do this and this and this. But then when they get evaluated by the vendor executives, they're gonna come up against, why are you doing that work? I don't understand. And so just like it has to be at all levels in your own organization, it also has to be at a higher level with the vendor organization, that they're going to understand this is what this customer wants, this is what we can build. And almost always, kind of typical waterfall vendors will fight this at the beginning. Oh no, here's a reason. Oh, Agile stupid, all this other stuff. But eventually, at least for that part of the organization, if it's a big vendor, that they will start to understand that this is a new capability that they can go out and sell now, that they can actually do that they couldn't do before. But it does take kind of getting through some of that resistance with the vendors, if that's not what they're used to.
Yeah. And in the end, it ends up being powerful for everybody, because we have this backlog, right? And we're going to, the team, which may be a mixed team, that's producing working tested software. And it's very clear of what the definition of done is. Is this done or is it not? And, we're leaving a lot less up to interpretation. So in the end, the vendors just want to know that if we're doing good work, like, are we going to be paid accordingly, and are we going to be treated fairly? And we're getting them into a situation which is much more healthy for them, and they're going to enjoy it. It is a process of change, and just like any change management, you need to manage that. But it's important that you, as an organization, set that expectation so that it's not put on individual teams or individual managers to manage that type of vendor relationship. So we've talked a lot about, leveraging your contracts, working with procurement, setting that expectation of, are we wanting people insourced or outsourced? Just like you do that for recruiting. So if you're doing an Agile transformation, you may change your internal recruiting so that your direct hires are getting, these are become part of the job requirement for new employees that you hire. We also have spent time helping organizations know how to source the right contractors, right? So for recruiting, you may be looking at different pools of candidates because you're looking for different skill sets. The same thing in contractors. There are contractors out there that do this. Daryl, I'm sure time and time again, you don't only recommend our studio. there's lots of studios that we recommend in order to build things.
Yeah. Over the past probably 20 years, we've seen a lot of Agile consulting firms pop up, and some of them are Agile in name only, I guess. Again, with the 6-month sprints and that kind of stuff. But there are lots of companies the consulting firms that are able to that have made this switch and have not just pasted the names. Phases are now sprints, and managers are now Scrum masters, but have really embodied all the aspects that companies need for agility, and right down to the coding practices. So doing test-driven development, continuous integration, and so those are the companies that you want to focus on, and kind of getting past the marketing shtick, and we help our customers do that too. So it's hard to ask an interview question that you don't know the answer to. It's hard to ask people about how well do you do test-driven development if you don't know what test-driven development is. So we can actually help our customers with that in some cases, where they're trying to identify those right vendors. And sometimes the right vendors, us, with studios, we do all those things, but sometimes it's the existing vendors that they are using that have those agile practices, and that we just need to make sure that the contracts are in place, and that the expectation of the vendor is that this is the service that will get provided.
Right. And in the end, it's in everyone's interest to get those right relationships in place, because we're doing a lot of work, expedition by expedition, working to help the organization transform and achieve certain goals. And if we can get more and more portions of the organization or parts of the team helping push and accelerate those goals versus kind of slow down and anchor on old practices, it's good for everybody. So it's really a key. It's kind of a boring subject in a sense that we're talking about variable spend and contracts, and not like building cool products, but it's a key leverage point where you can really make a big impact, and it doesn't need to cost you millions of dollars. You're going to already be spending this money. Let's make sure that money is procured and contracted correctly, so that you're getting as much benefit from that spend that you're already making as possible. All right, Daryl, anything else you want to add, or are we on to the next topic?
I don't think I have anything else.
All right, so that's all we have for now. If you have other things or questions, please comment or reach out. We're always excited to talk about these things, and we will have more and more topics coming out in the near future.
Thanks, everybody.